CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Germany's centre-left claims victory in the election, but the Conservative candidate vows to fight on. We're live in Berlin.
Our other headlines: stop panic buying petrol. The UK government tells motorists not to stock up as filling stations run out.
China says it will try its best to avoid power cuts as northeast residents are hit by blackouts.
And protests across India as farmers demonstrate against key government reforms. Germany has voted for change. That was the message from the centre-left Social Democrats as they claimed a narrow election victory, edging out Chancellor Angela Merkel's centre-right CDU in its worst ever performance. Olaf Scholz, the SPD's Chancellor candidate, says he has a mandate to lead the next government and is seeking a coalition with the Greens and Free Democrats. Scholz said voters have told Angela Merkel's Conservatives it's time to go into opposition after 16 years in power.
Preliminary results put the Social Democratic SPD narrowly ahead on 25.7%, with the CDU-CSU alliance just behind on 24.1%. The Greens are in third with 14.8%, and the Liberal FDP has 11.5%. That puts the two smaller parties in the position of kingmakers. In other words, they can make or break the bigger party's chances of power. They must now decide whether to support an SPD-led government under Olaf Scholz in what's popularly known as a traffic light coalition, because the colours of the parties concerned are red, yellow and green. Or they could back Armin Laschet's CDU in a so-called Jamaica coalition, named for the colours of that country's flag. Let's talk now to our correspondent Ryan Thompson in Berlin. So, Ryan, Germany looks set for weeks, if not months, of talks on a coalition.
Hi there, Robin. Yeah, that's right. This could go on for quite some time. Olaf Scholz, the SPD winner, has estimated potentially as long as up until the new year. The thing that's interesting about these elections, it has really flipped the German campaign cycle on its head, because normally it is the larger winning parties that reach out to the smaller parties to form the coalition. But this time, it is the smaller parties that seem to hold all the cards here. You've used that term, kingmakers. It is a huge, huge difference this time around, because now, as the SPD is looking to form its government, well, the Greens and the Free Liberal Democrats hold a little bit more power. And when it comes to negotiating what the next government's political platform will actually look like and what issues will be of key importance, they have a lot more say in determining those questions and those factors. We expect that the SDP will really have to battle it out here with the CDU, because despite coming in second place, Armin Laschet, the candidate of Merkel's own party, is still doing everything he can to keep his party in power in the next government. We heard from the candidates today. Here's what they had to say.
Olaf Scholz is taking a victory lap, now that results have confirmed a narrow but clear victory for the Social Democrats. Over 25% of German voters have backed Scholz and the SPD to lead the next government. Speaking to reporters Monday, Scholz outlined his plans to take on Germany's top job and form a new coalition in the parliament.
My idea is that we will be very fast in getting a result for this government, and it should be before Christmas if possible. On the other hand, you should know Germany always has coalition governments, and it was always stable.
But it's not yet clear who will be in that coalition. Many expect it to include two other parties, a first in modern German history. It's unlikely that the current Grand Coalition between Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats and the SPD will continue. Sunday's results have come as a major loss to the CDU and its candidate Armin Laschet. However, he's vowing to be part of the next government, offering the possibility the CDU could rule with the FDP and the Green Party, a so-called Jamaica coalition, the colors of the country's flag.
For us, we can say that no party can read a mandate to govern for itself, to govern out of this result, not even us. The Federal Board and the Presidium of the CDU agree that we are ready for talks on a so-called Jamaica coalition.
Many have criticized Laschet for refusing to give up at a time when Germany is undergoing a monumental political change. Sunday's election marks the end of Chancellor Angela Merkel's 16 stable years at the head of government, with some uncertain times now ahead.
Now, at least in the short term, Angela Merkel will stay on as Chancellor. She's not going anywhere. She will be the caretaker of the government while these negotiations go on. The conversations are at least behind the scenes right now. They are not formal discussions between the parties, but we do know that the Liberal Democrats and Greens are planning to meet later this week to try and get themselves on the same page to potentially team up. The Liberal Democrats have about 11% of the vote. The Greens have about 15% of the vote. When you put that together, they're edging out at about 26%, which makes them a powerful quarter chunk of this vote to potentially have a stronger point in negotiating when they talk to the SPD or the CDU.
Ryan Thompson in Berlin, thanks very much.
Well, Carsten Bresky is the global head of macro for ING Research. He told me how the markets have been reacting to Germany's election.
I think they see a stability-oriented next German government. Even if we don't know which parties really are going to join, there will be either a chancellor from the Social Democrats, markets know, or at least a chancellor from the Conservative Party, at least where the markets know the party. And I think taking all these together, the markets think that the next German government will bring across a few structural reforms, more investment, no abrupt change to what they know about the German economy and German politics.
Well, we still haven't got a definitive look to a final government, and that could take weeks or even months. I wonder, is that instability over that period of time going to be a problem?
Instability is definitely not a problem you should associate with German politics. Because first of all, we have a caretaking government which is led by Angela Merkel. So I think she stands for this stability. The other thing is we have an ongoing policies. So I think there is no reason to be afraid of any kind of instability. And I think that's what we also learned from other European countries in the past. Look at Belgium, without a government for almost 2 years. Currently look at the Netherlands, without a government for almost 6 months. And there hasn't been any policy instability or uncertainty. You know, it could only harm the future prospects of the German economy, because the longer it takes to form a new government means the longer it takes to finally agree on these highly needed structural reforms for this economy.
How do the financial markets view the two most likely outcomes?
What we will see with the most likely outcome, which is a government consisting of the Greens, the Liberals, either led by the Social Democrats or led by the Conservatives, means that we will get a next German government which will bring across more reforms or new reforms in the areas of climate change, digitalization, education, infrastructure. It will all be garnered by more fiscal stimulus and more investment. So the only open questions are, how will it be financed? But this is nothing that markets should care about. Markets will see a next German government which will bring across some reforms, some changes, positive for the economy, but still the German way. And the German way always means slowly and no abrupt changes, no disruption, gradually moving on to make the country a bit more future-proof.
The international community has been reacting to the early German election results.
Beijing says it hopes the new German government will continue to pursue what it calls pragmatic and balanced policies when it comes to relations with China.
Facts have proved that as long as China and Germany consolidate and deepen mutual trust and treat each other as equals, focus on cooperation and try to achieve win-win results, we will be able to push forward our bilateral relations. We also hope the new German government will continue its pragmatic and balanced policy towards China and consolidate the main tone of China-Germany relations and cooperation.
So, what does the EU think about the results so far? Our correspondent Giles Gibson is in Brussels. So, Giles, give us a sense of what the reaction's been.
Well, while some leaders here in Europe, including Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, have come out and openly congratulated the SPD and Olaf Scholz on these election results, the European Commission behind me here in Brussels are being much, much more cautious, really keeping their cards close to their chest, as we might have expected. A spokesperson at the Commission was asked for their reaction to these German election results earlier on in the daily press briefing, and they basically said that because the new coalition government hasn't been formed yet, because negotiations are going to be going on for weeks or even months, that there is really no comment about the German election results from the European Commission. However, behind closed doors, you have to say that the European Commission and the European Union overall will really have noticed two important things from these election results in Germany. Firstly, the fact that the parties that are likely going to be making up the next government, the next coalition, whatever that looks like exactly, all of them have campaigned on a pro-European platform, a pro-European stance. And secondly, the Alternative for Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany party, that right-wing party that campaigned very strongly against the European Union, talking about Dexit, Deutschland exiting from the European Union in the same way that the UK left the European Union. Well, they were left trailing behind those other parties in fifth place.
And Giles, while the parties are negotiating the next coalition, what will Angela Merkel's role be?
Well, of course, if you look back to 2017 and that German election, it actually took 4 months for a coalition deal to be agreed. So while these parties and these party leaders are going through the political wrangling of trying to figure out what that next coalition is going to look like, Angela Merkel is going to be the caretaker Chancellor in Germany. And if you look at the calendar in terms of European events and events on the world stage, there are some really important things coming up in just the next few weeks. You've got a leaders' summit at the European Council here in Brussels at the end of October. You've also got the G20 summit in Rome coming up at the end of October as well. And then you have the crucial climate change conference, COP26, coming up in Glasgow in November. So really what you're going to have is a potential power vacuum here in Brussels, with a caretaker German Chancellor really standing in while those parties in Germany try and negotiate what the next government is going to look like.
Giles Gibson in Brussels, thanks very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, it's one of the world's most exciting car companies. The CEO is on the show next to tell us all about Polestar's NASDAQ float.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of a story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic.
For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV, online, and Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The UK government is urging motorists to stop panic buying fuel as forecourts run low and queues run long. Competition laws have been suspended to allow oil companies to prioritise areas most in need.
Well, it's deepening a supply chain crisis already triggered by a shortage of truck drivers. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson is in Oxford and has been following the story. Andrew, just how serious is the UK's fuel delivery shortage?
Well, at the moment, Jamie, looking at the streets around the UK, very serious indeed. It started on Friday, built up ahead of steam over the weekend. Early this morning, most of the petrol stations in most of the UK cities, not so much Belfast, Northern Ireland, had queues of cars outside them even before the sun came up, waiting to get fuel. And that was leading to people following tankers in their cars, trying to find out where the tankers were going, hiding outside petrol stations, waiting for them to open, getting involved in arguments with other drivers. There have been some ugly scenes posted on social media, all the kind of things the government does not like to see and reflects very badly on the organisation of the country. Now, as far as the government's concerned, this is all just a storm in a teacup. If people didn't panic buy fuel, then there would be enough fuel to go around. But because they're concerned about the drivers not being able to deliver it on time, people have rushed out, and we've had this kind of logjam of cars here at the moment. Now, the embarrassing thing is that this is about drivers. That some retail organisations now say the UK is short of something in the region of 70 to 100,000 HGV drivers. A lot of those Europeans that have now gone back because they're no longer allowed to work here because of the new Brexit legislation. So that's not a good look for the government. And also, of course, the scenes you're about to see now in my report also are not a good look for this government.
Even before the sun was up on a new week, determined drivers across the UK joined long lines of cars waiting for fuel. They'd heard that nearly two-thirds of the country's 8,000 petrol stations were dry and didn't want to get caught out. A fear that's caused some chaos and long lines across the country and occasions where tempers have been getting frayed. The government doesn't want to accuse people of panic buying, but ministers are clear nonetheless that the drivers should avoid stocking up unnecessarily.
The quicker people do that, the better. There is no shortage of petrol, plenty of petrol in both our refineries and in storage. The only reason we don't have petrol on forecourts is that people are buying petrol and they don't need it.
Despite that, by midday, particularly in the cities, the situation was only getting worse.
I'm not that worried, because obviously it will be resolved sooner or later. It has to be resolved. It can't go on like that.
Yesterday I was queuing. I was like about to arrive to fill up the car, then petrol is finished. Today I still have like quarter of the tank. Hopefully maybe another half an hour to get there. It's really frustrating.
The government does have options. Ministers have said they're relaxing the competition laws, allowing fuel suppliers to work together logistically with competitors filling each other's forecourts if necessary. The government will also introduce a temporary relaxation of visas to allow back the European drivers pushed out by Brexit earlier this year. However, there's no guarantee such drivers will want to return for the 3-month period being proposed. Soldiers could be deployed to replace the driver shortage, but they'll need special training in handling liquid fuel loads. And all these options will take time, and public patience is already wearing thin. The government's biggest hope is that the panic buying slows down and of that there is very little sign so far.
But if that did happen, Andrew, your last point, the government may not have to act at all.
Well, yes, and I think that's what they're hoping, Jamie. I mean, they've lifted the Competition Act, but that'll take time to roll into any kind of improvement. I don't think they want soldiers on the streets driving these trucks, and there's not much hope of calling back all these retired HGV drivers to press them back into service. They would rather that everyone got the fuel, that was concerned about getting fuel, and things calmed down again. But this is a warning shot, and there's two warning shots in there. One is the precedent now that they're going to bring some workers back from Europe, not only to drive these trucks for the fuel companies, but also to drive them for the poultry farmers, and then the retail sector, and then the food sector are probably towards the winter going to say, we're also having trouble. So that rule has now been breached already. The government is having to bring back workers from Europe, which looks like, or can be painted as by the government's enemies, as something of a U-turn. The other problem is the energy crisis that's building in the background. Gas prices are extremely high at the moment, and we know there are problems with gas delivery down the line. The food and retail sector are worried about filling their shelves during the winter and Christmas periods. There's still the flu, the booster of the vaccines to come. There are plenty of bear traps out there that could create perhaps a perfect storm where the government can be painted as looking incompetent or late to the party or not really in control of events taking place. And already some MPs are starting to whisper about the winter of discontent back in the late 70s, 78, 79, the winter of strike action and power cuts when the Labour government were finally seen off because of that, and it took them nearly 20 years to get back into power. That's the kind of thing that keeps Downing Street awake at night.
Andrew Wilson, thank you very much.
As the UK struggles with a gas crisis and prices surge in Europe, Hungary has secured a long-term supply deal with Russia. State-owned Gazprom, one of the world's largest gas suppliers, will ship natural gas to Hungary for the next 15 years. Penelope Liesch reports from Budapest.
The deal that will see Hungary tied to a long-term contract with Gazprom was signed here at Budapest's Foreign Ministry. The Russian gas giant will provide gas for the next 15 years with the option for Hungary to change the amount it purchases after the first 10. It comes after a 25-year deal Hungary signed in 1996 with Russian gas shipped via Ukrainian pipelines, recently coming to an end. The new deal will see 4.5 billion cubic metres of natural gas supplied annually, a 7% increase on Hungary's gas use last year. The majority of Hungary's shipments will now come via Serbia, and 1 billion cubic metres will also enter Hungary from Austria.
Here in Hungary, energy supply is a matter of security, sovereignty and economics, but not politics. Flats, homes and apartments cannot be heated with political manifestos, only with gas. The same is true with industry.
According to local media reports, Gazprom is ready to increase supplies to Europe and is interested in more supply contracts. In the past, the Russian gas giant has been accused by the International Energy Agency and members of the European Parliament of not doing enough to increase its gas supplies to Europe, where prices have soared. Russia has been selling gas to Hungary for nearly 5 decades, and that's set to continue with this new deal starting on the 1st of October. Penelope Liesch, CGTN, Budapest.
Google is appealing its record $5 billion fine from EU regulators for alleged abuse in the Android apps market. The ruling made 3 years ago claims Google unfairly insisted that phone makers pre-install apps, including Google Search, Maps and Chrome. But the tech giant says the decision ignores rivals like Apple. It's also disputing the way the penalty was calculated.
Facebook will pause the development of a new children's version of its Instagram app. There's been criticism over the app, which is targeted at 10 to 12-year-olds, particularly after a report claimed Instagram had a harmful effect on teenagers. Parent company Facebook says it will re-evaluate the plan and instead work on safety features to protect younger users.
Shares in Rolls-Royce have jumped after the engine maker struck a $2 billion deal to sell a subsidiary to a private equity buyer. The group, which is looking to claw back losses from the pandemic, is selling its Spanish operation, ITP Aero, to a consortium run by Bain Capital. Shares rose 10% to an 18-month high.
Chinese property giant Evergrande says the construction of one of the world's largest football stadiums in the city of Guangzhou will go ahead as planned. That's despite the developer's cash concerns. It missed a major payment deadline last week and is $300 billion in debt. The stadium is costing nearly $2 billion and is due to be finished next year.
People in northeast China have been hit by power cuts as outages affecting factories spread to homes. Coal shortages and tougher emission standards have pushed prices to record highs and led to curbs on usage across the country. China's main power distributor, the State Grid, says it'll ensure people have enough power. The power shortages affecting more than a dozen Chinese provinces. Wu Bin now reports.
Overseas demand has rebounded, and Chinese companies are struggling to keep up. In the major export hub Zhejiang, power cuts have left the production lines idle. High coal prices are making it unprofitable to operate.
The cost has tripled compared with 2019. We cannot finish the overseas orders, and we have to shut down if we don't raise the price.
Similar stories are being told in Guangdong, the province with biggest economy, but some companies view reduced inventories differently.
The cost has increased by 4 times since last year. I think power rationing will be helpful in the long run, because when we stop operation, the cost of raw materials would stop soaring.
The provincial government said the summer drought has pushed up demand.
We are offering subsidies to plants generating power with natural gas to make up for their cost.
A string of factors are at play. Prices for raw materials and transport are rising globally, and the summer drought has meant fewer sources for clean energy generation. The big question now is whether the shortage is a byproduct of the pandemic or something that will persist for a long time. For now at least, local authorities in the northeastern province of Jilin have promised a sufficient heating supply for the upcoming winter. Wu Bin, CGTN.
Meanwhile, China's Vice Premier Han Zheng has been holding talks with European Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans to discuss how the two can work together to fight climate change. Timmermans said he hoped they could expand coordination ahead of the UN's COP26 meeting in Glasgow in November.
The electric car maker Polestar is to go public in a deal valued at $20 billion.
The Swedish-based group, part owned by Volvo and China's Geely, plans to list on the New York Nasdaq through a so-called blank check backer.
Polestar's chief executive told me about his plans.
Going public that way through a SPAC merger means there's already a company listed, and Polestar merges with this company, and through that becomes the major part of it, and it ends up a Polestar being listed as the Nasdaq. This is a very fast-tracked way, a very efficient way to bring this company Polestar in a very short time to the public market.
Why are you and your company so absolutely convinced that electric is the future, electric is the answer? Many car companies, as you well know, even if it takes place in private, are hedging and investigating a hydrogen parallel future.
Well, I think that's very, very clear that the way towards zero emissions will go the electric cars now. And electric cars will be fed by batteries for the decade to come. This is for the private consumer, the way how to participate in this electrification. Might be different for buses and trucks, but when it comes to the private mobility, then electric cars fed by batteries is the way to go.
I have to tell you that in much of Europe there is a huge electric charging infrastructure deficit. I mean, I wonder if you acknowledge that and whether that's a significant problem for the growth of your company and your sector, your competitors.
Well, funny that you should say that, James, because the UK is one of our biggest success stories. Polestar is selling in the UK very strong figures. We have grown there. And let's face it, it is, of course, you charging at home, at your private home overnight, gives you actually the comfort and the great experience of not having to go to the petrol station anymore.
If you mention the words electric car, people will often mention the word Tesla straight back at you. Tesla has stolen a march on many of the other names. Put your company in context. How far are you behind? How far is there to catch up?
Tesla indeed made over a long decade now that way. We are on a much faster track. We have a manufacturing footprint that exists already. We do not have to build factories. We have, through the association with our group colleague here, Volvo, a very good track record when it comes to safety, when it comes to quality, bringing a car secured into production. So that is what customer can expect when they shop for a Polestar.
The global car industry, regularly reported on programs like this, has been in crisis for months because of semiconductor shortages. How is it for you at the moment? Are you seeing a restriction of production? When do you expect it all to get better?
21 indeed is a year where semiconductor shortage had to be taken into consideration for our volume planning. The 29,000 that we're aiming for by the end of the year are secured. We can keep our production up and running. 22, of course, again, a year that will start with these thoughts and these precautions, but by the end of it, we are confident that we are not restricted anymore.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Who should speak for Afghanistan at the United Nations? We'll be in New York next.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive the COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, repeat loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our main story, Germany's centre-left Social Democrats claim a narrow election victory, edging out Chancellor Angela Merkel's centre-right CDU in its worst ever performance. Olaf Scholz, the SPD Chancellor candidate, says he has a mandate to lead the next government and wants a coalition with the Greens and Free Democrats. Scholz said voters have told Angela Merkel's Conservatives it's time to go into opposition after 16 years in power.
Deborah Steinborn is a journalist in Hamburg in Germany. I asked her how significant the political shift will be if Olaf Scholz becomes Chancellor.
We can expect, if Olaf Scholz becomes Chancellor and the Social Democratic Party does indeed pull through with being the major party, that it will not be a big swing to the left. Olaf Scholz himself is rather centrist rather than left, as many of his colleagues in the party's upper ranks may be.
And at the start of the campaign, the CDU's Armin Laschet looked destined to be the next Chancellor. So where did it go wrong for him and his party?
That's an excellent question. Well, what we've seen is that Armin Laschet, who everyone expected would just be maintaining the status quo of what we've had for the past 16 years with Angela Merkel, he just proceeded to introduce one gaffe after another one in his campaign and really became the weakest candidate in the entire race, one could say.
And as you say, a coalition must be formed. It's not a done deal yet, though, is it?
Not at all. It's just getting started today. In fact, it's quite confusing. It's unprecedented how confusing things are. The razor-thin electoral outcome that we saw last night means that it's unclear who's going to talk with whom first, what they're going to talk about, and what will happen from there. The German constitution doesn't even have guardrails for a situation like this.
And Olaf Scholz is the likely new Chancellor, but how different would he be from Angela Merkel?
Well, that's hard to say before it's really clear whether he will be Chancellor. There's actually a lot of discussion in Berlin today behind the scenes about the possibility of the Christian Democrats trying to literally throw out Armin Laschet and bring in their CSU counterpart, Markus Söder, as a candidate for Chancellor. If they manage to do such amazing negotiations, that actually is a possibility. But with respect to Olaf Scholz, as he is a rather centrist candidate, he is not as left-leaning as other members of his party. It's possible that it will be status quo for Germany. That said, we can expect a very different era to emerge from this election campaign than what we've had with the steady hand of Angela Merkel guiding not only Germany, but the European Union as well. I think those times are most likely over, and Germany will, at least for the coming months, if not the coming years, be looking much more inwardly than it has in a long time.
Well, our correspondent Natalie Carney has been taking a closer look at Social Democrats leader Olaf Scholz, the centre-left contender vying to fill Chancellor Angela Merkel's shoes.
Olaf Scholz. Born in 1958 in the western state of Lower Saxony, Olaf Scholz went on to graduate from the University of Hamburg as a lawyer specializing in labor and employment. In 1975, he joined Germany's Social Democratic Party, the oldest party in the country. Scholz climbed his way through the ranks, becoming the party's deputy leader between 2009 and 2019, during which time he was appointed Minister of Labor and Social Affairs, followed by Minister of Finance and Vice Chancellor of Germany a few years later in 2018. Scholz also served as the mayor of Hamburg for 7 consecutive years. In August of 2020, he was nominated as the SPD's candidate for Chancellor.
We have a good plan. I also have a good plan for the future and for what is necessary now.
While Scholz has long positioned himself as Merkel's natural successor, in recent years his political career has been stained with political gaffes and scandals, including accusations of corruption. While mayor of Hamburg, he was accused of overseeing the theft of more than 47 million euros by the powerful bank Warburg & Co. Then in 2020, as federal finance minister, he was questioned over his alleged mismanagement of warnings about accountancy malpractice at Wirecard, an online payment services company. Scholz is occasionally nicknamed the Scholzomat for his perceived lack of emotion and robotic personality. Yet his statesman-like calm over the last few weeks of the election campaign, coupled with his measured use of technical terms during political debates, appear to have positioned him as the steady hand that most Germans wanted to replace Angela Merkel.
I've worked in a lot of election campaigns, and I must say that it is very moving to see how many people trust me to be the head of the next government of the Federal Republic of Germany.
However, some would still argue that his political good fortune was primarily due to the mistakes of others. Natalie Carney, CGTN, in Munich.
At least one person has died in an earthquake on the Greek island of Crete. Several others were injured as buildings collapsed in the 5.8 magnitude quake. Evangelos Ipsas reports.
This is what people in Heraklion woke up to as a magnitude 6 earthquake hits Greece's largest island of Crete, killing one person and injuring several others. The southeast town of Arkalojori was the epicenter, but the tremors were felt strongly across the island. The earthquake damaged homes and churches and caused rock slides in Arkalojori, with a 67-year-old man being killed when the dome of a church caved in during renovation works.
The side walls were still standing, but all of the roof had collapsed and the rubble was 1 metre high, so we believed that hopes that the person would be alive were slim. With the help of heavy machinery, we removed and emptied the rubble around and inside the church and reached the lifeless form of the unfortunate worker underneath.
Monday's quake sent people fleeing into the streets in the city of Heraklion, and schools were evacuated. Repeated aftershocks rattled the area, adding damage in villages and towns near the epicenter. According to the fire department, 30 members of its disaster response units with sniffer dogs and specialized rescue equipment have been sent to Crete from Athens, while all disaster response units and fire department have been placed on general alert. The Athens Geodynamic Institute said the quake struck at 9:17 a.m. local time, with an epicenter of 246 kilometers southeast of the Greek capital. International and domestic flights to Heraklion Airport have not been affected, while there's no reports of damages to hotels in the area. Police advised most people in Arkalojori and those in nearby towns to evacuate their homes, and many will spend the night in tents set up by the Greek authorities. Evangelos Ipsas for CGTN, Greece.
China has criticized Britain for sailing a warship through the Taiwan Strait, saying the move harbored evil intentions. A post on the ship's Twitter account said HMS Richmond was passing through international waters en route to Vietnam. China's military says it mobilized air and naval forces to follow the ship and warned it away.
A volcano on the Spanish island of La Palma is erupting again after its activity had slowed down. Volcanologists, along with the military, are monitoring lava and gas flows from the volcano, which are heading towards the island's Atlantic coast. People living in some coastal areas have been told to stay in their homes amid fears of toxic gas and explosions if the lava reaches the water.
Abortion rights campaigners have been celebrating in the tiny republic of San Marino after an overwhelming vote in favour of legalising terminations up to 12 weeks. 3/4 of voters in the 60-square-kilometre republic voted to overturn a law which dated back to 1865. Previously, women wanting the procedure had to travel outside the enclave in northern Italy, risking a 3-year jail term.
Turkey will go ahead with a second arms purchase from Russia, despite the risk of further NATO sanctions. A previous delivery of 4 Russian S-400 missiles led to Turkey's expulsion from the United States' new F-35 weapons program. Washington says the use of Russian equipment is a security risk, but Turkey's President Erdogan says defense policy must be a national issue.
The World Health Organization has opened a new academy for health workers in the French city of Lyon. President Emmanuel Macron attended the opening along with the head of the World Health Organization. The organization says the academy will provide critical learning facilities for its staff and all health workers.
Meanwhile, French President Macron was hit with an egg while visiting a food trade fair in the city. He was there to promote the country's famous gastronomy. A protester who shouted "Vive la Révolution," long live the revolution, was arrested. The egg bounced off the president without breaking.
The United Nations General Assembly is set to close without hearing from Afghanistan. Various groups have been competing to take the country's seat in New York, including representatives of the previous administration. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, who's been following the story for us. John, what's been the focus of the morning?
Well, the focus of the morning was the appearance for the very first time by Naftali Bennett, who is the new Israeli Prime Minister, and he came here amid intense security, the like of which I haven't actually seen at a UN General Assembly, probably ever. They had huge trucks here filled with sand, just like they do on New Year's Eve in Times Square, and I haven't seen that. I don't remember ever seeing that before. Anyway, he came here and he spoke. He called Israel a lighthouse in a stormy sea, living in a very tough neighborhood. He said his government was the most diverse in the country's history. He talked about Iran, laid into the new Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, called him the butcher of Tehran, said that international relations were at a watershed with Tehran at the moment, and there was a watershed between Israel and Iran and Israel's tolerance for what Iran is doing. He said Israel will not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. Iran, he said, is weaker economically than you think. We will prevail. So all pretty standard stuff there from an Israeli prime minister, although a very different kind of speech from his predecessor, of course, Netanyahu, who used to bring in props, which he would use to draw on cartoon. You remember he brought a cartoon of a bomb into the General Assembly Hall once. None of that. Very straightforward. Really quite a short speech. And also, I would say, rather more optimistic than I might otherwise have been expecting. For example, he said it's not all darkness in the Middle East, and he referred to the Abraham Accords, which have been going on. Of course, the first of those way back 42 years ago with Egypt, Jordan 27 years ago, now the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. And he said there will be more. So that was what he had to say. And the other big story of the day, as I think you touched on, Jamie, in the introduction, is that they've taken the name Afghanistan off the list of speakers on this final day. Now, the background to this in 10 or 20 seconds is that the Taliban asked to appear at the General Assembly as the government now of Afghanistan. A lot of hatred towards the Taliban here for all sorts of reasons. Remember, the United Nations did not recognize the previous Taliban government between 1996 and 2002. So there was debate behind the scenes. Should they allow them? Should they not? If they did allow them to speak here, would that give the UN leverage over the Taliban, which they presently do not have? Well, then we learned within the past 24 hours, the Russian representative told us that, in fact, the Credentials Committee either has not met or they didn't meet for very long. I'm not quite sure what it was. But they deferred a decision on Afghanistan and the Taliban. And now the Afghanistan name has been removed, and with it, the existing ambassador who was appointed by the previous regime. So that's where we stand. That's the big news, those two things, Naftali Bennett and the Afghan story, the big stories of the day so far.
John, we can hear a pretty substantial protest off camera.
Yes.
Whatever's going on there, as you look back over this extraordinary gathering, I wonder what the highlights have been.
Do you know, I'm so glad you mentioned that. We were just talking about this. I can't show you because we can't turn the cameras around, but just over here in my 2 o'clock position, there is, they call it Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. And that's where the protesters go. And they're always very, very loud. But the great irony is they don't realize that the diplomats and the ambassadors and the leaders can't really hear them. It's very sad, really. In some respects, it really is. Look, just quickly, the highlight of the week, Antonio Guterres by far, that amazing speech on Tuesday morning in which he said, I'm here to sound the alarm. The world must wake up. We're on the edge of abyss. Joe Biden's vaccination meeting, which was virtual. President Xi saying that we're in a period now of turbulence and transformation. Him also pledging to end the building of coal-fired power stations in countries abroad. Lots more still to come. A meeting of the Security Council today and a big meeting in the General Assembly tomorrow, Tuesday, about 25 years of what they call the Nuclear Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which was designed to stop countries doing just that, testing nuclear weapons. China, Egypt, Iran, the US and Israel have agreed to it, but they've never ratified it. So that's going on today and tomorrow. And of course, next on the diplomatic agenda will be COP26 in Glasgow in around 40 days' time from now. And a lot of what has been discussed here regarding climate change, I think, is really a precursor to the serious talking that will happen in Scotland.
John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the secrets of space. China opens a capsule that's been out of this world.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Farmers in India have held a strike a year after controversial agricultural reforms were introduced.
There have been repeated protests over the past 12 months, with farmers saying the legislation threatens their livelihoods. Ravinder Bawa reports.
After over 8 months of protesting at the borders of Delhi, farmers have reached central area of Delhi, and this is just a kilometre away from the Parliament of India. And here, the farmers are holding a parallel parliament while the monsoon session of the Indian Parliament is on. There was chaos in the Parliament as well, as both the houses got adjourned after the Member of Parliament of opposition parties led a protest inside the Parliament in support of the farmers.
The enthusiasm we had on the first day, it's much stronger and bigger now, and this enthusiasm will never lessen. It's based on truth, and it's not a show-off. This is a genuine agitation, and it will never get old.
These lion-hearted farmers who bathe in milk and grew up eating butter are here today sitting in trolleys under the hot sun. They've been exposed to rain, heat and the cold. How can we sleep peacefully? Looking at them, I've been here supporting them since then. I will stay put here and not leave until we win.
The security has been beefed up in the capital city. This is the first time since the violence in Delhi during a tractor rally on January 26th that the authorities have given permission to protesting farmer unions to hold a protest inside the city. Farmer leaders have assured the government that the protest will be peaceful. The farmers are demanding the scrapping of controversial agricultural laws. 11 rounds of talks have failed between the protesting farmers and the government so far. Farmers want nothing but the repeal of laws, while the government is willing to make changes. The farmers will continue with their parallel parliament session till the 13th of August, while the government has said that they are ready for talks again. Will this deadlock end this time? Ravinder Bawa, CGTN, Delhi.
Coffee has taken hold in China over the last decade, and the China-Africa Trade Fair is an international shop window for businesses like food and drink producers to sell their goods to the huge Chinese market. Yu Li reports.
China's coffee market has huge potential. The number of cups of coffee consumed per capita in China is 6.2 per year. That's about 85 billion cups total. The average annual growth rate of coffee consumption in China is 16% compared to the global rate of 2%. And at the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo, there are many promising opportunities for coffee producers to break into the Chinese market.
Africa is one of the most important production areas of high-quality coffee in the world. We see a promising business opportunity to import African coffee beans into the Chinese market. There are also many high-quality coffee producers in Africa that lack channels for domestic sales.
Lei Ting is the founder of Overseas Home, a company that endeavors to connect businesses from China and African countries. The company has helped some 40 African coffee-producing exhibitors set up booths at this year's expo.
Because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, they can't come to Changsha to participate in the expo in person. We assist African companies in transporting products to the exhibition site and organize professional personnel in China to help them find partners and local sales parties.
The coffee trade has grown steadily in China. Ethiopia exported 6,000 tons of coffee beans to China in 2020. And according to Lei, the number will grow to 10,000 tons this year. Achievements like this encourage African countries to establish deeper connections with China.
We have a prototype we're developing. We think, firstly, connecting people, African people, to African people, because we have many different countries in Africa, and then African people to Chinese people is the most important thing. With the connection of people, that's where you can do business. That's where business starts. That's where the communication starts.
Both Chinese and African companies see huge potential for business opportunities, with the expo serving as a bridge to connect them. Yu Li, CGTN, Changsha, Hunan Province.
And finally, an opening ceremony has been held in Beijing, but not as we know it. It was to unload samples brought back to Earth from China's Tiangong space station, including seeds from a space breeding program. Back in June, 3 Chinese astronauts began a 3-month trip, a significant step forward in the construction of the space station.
Our main story again. Germany's centre-left Social Democrats claim a narrow election victory, edging out Chancellor Angela Merkel's centre-right CDU party in its worst-ever performance. Olaf Scholz, the SPD party's Chancellor candidate, says he has a mandate to lead the next government and wants a coalition with the Greens and 3 Democrats. Scholz said voters have told Merkel's Conservatives it's time to go into opposition after 16 years in power. A period of potentially lengthy coalition talks is now getting underway.
Our other headlines. The UK government tells motorists to stop panic buying fuel as filling stations run out.
And China's main electricity network says it will work to avoid power cuts as northeast residents are hit by blackouts.
And that is just about it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
Don't forget, we're on smart TV apps Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.